All right, I always feel that it's like a fire drill when a 49ers player signs a little later at night. It's 10:46 p.m. where I'm at right now. I'm in the central time zone, headed to the West Coast in a couple days. But those of you back on the Pacific time zone, I guess this is the perfect time for you. The 49ers have picked up Siran Neal, new special teams ace for the 49ers. And my initial takeaway is George Odum might not be long for this football team. 49ers 32-year-old special teams ace George Odum. He'll be 32 this season's been with the 49ers for quite a while now. New special teams coordinator is Brant Boyer, and Odum has $1 million of his contract vesting into a guarantee on April 1st, which is in 2 weeks if he's still on the team. So it is very possible that this new signing, Siran Neal, will replace George Odum on the 49ers roster. The news comes to us from Cameron Wolf, who says that special teams ace / DB Siran Neal is finalizing a 2-year deal with the San Francisco 49ers tonight. Neal, as you can tell, has been with the Dolphins and with the Buffalo Bills. I just watched a quick interview, and Siran Neal had a good quote. This is the one that I appreciated when I was watching it. I want to carry the team on special teams. So he's had over 300 special team snaps in 5 consecutive seasons. This is a player who definitely qualifies as a special teams ace. Every single season in the NFL, over 200 special team snaps. So he's been trusted to be in that phase of the game. As we know, the 49ers were absolutely atrocious on special teams last season. So bad that they fired their special teams coordinator, Brian Schneider. He is now the assistant special teams coordinator in Washington. The 49ers replaced Schneider with Brant Boyer. Brant Boyer brought in Colt Anderson, who was the head special teams coordinator of the Tennessee Titans, to be his assistant. Typically, when a unit is that bad and the leadership is swapped out, as the 49ers swapped it out to an experienced new coordinator in Brant Boyer, that coordinator has a chance to bring in a lot of his guys of his own choosing. So on Friday, we learned that the 49ers were releasing their long snapper since 2020, Tabor Pepper. They replaced him with John Weeks, who's been a long snapper in this league for 15 years. And now we see that the 49ers are adding Siran Neal, a special teams ace who's going to be in on all the coverage units, and I'm sure he'll be on some of the blocking units, somebody who's delivered 300-plus snaps a season. The goal for the 49ers is very obviously to improve the special teams rank that I skewered today in my piece up on the San Francisco Standard as part of my 4 pillars that the 49ers have truly struggled with, especially in 2024. And the only way that we can measure potential 49ers improvement fairly heading into 2025 is if we isolate these 4 variables and say, what are the 49ers doing to improve these phases of the game? Because these are 4 very fundamental things. They were terrible on run defense last year. They're terrible in short yardage run offense last year. They're terrible when it came to separating in the receiving game last year. And they were terrible on special teams last year. In fact, I should open up the State of the 49ers special teams piece that I did about a month ago, because we could see exactly where the 49ers are going to need to improve. And, you know, a lot of people will say, how the hell are the 49ers going to be any better? And I don't know if they're going to be better or they're going to be worse, but I can talk about strategy all day. It shouldn't be all that hard to improve in the 4 phases of the game that I just showed you, because the 49ers were at or near the bottom of the league in those very, very important categories. And really the only way to go for San Francisco is up, especially on special teams, where the 49ers don't screw it up mentality, which I think has come from Kyle Shanahan. I think that he's broadcast that kind of don't screw it up mentality, has screwed it up. So now they've got Brant Boyer. There's Jake Moody. He's still on the team. Mitch Wishnowsky, yes, still on the team. We'll see what the exact course of action with both the kicker and the punter for the rest of this offseason is. They've got a new long snapper, though, in John Weeks. Brant Boyer is illustrated here. They don't actually have a picture of Brant Boyer with Moody and Wisnowski yet because this scene has not yet happened on the practice field. But Boyer's got a lot to fix with this 49ers special teams unit. There he is. We went through a ton of it on the San Francisco Standard, but this right here goes to show you how bad this unit was in 2024. I mean, just behold this. It's almost a piece of art in how bad the performance was. You can gauge good by blue and bad by red. So in 2021, which is the first column, the 49ers had a good field goal unit. It was above average, at least. They still had Robbie Gould that year. They punted decently. Mitch Wisnowski was healthier than he is now. Now, they were terrible in kick return. They were bad in kick coverage. Kick return fumbled away a couple that year. But boy, 2021, even though it was really bad, would have looked really good in 2024. They got better in 2022, Brian Schneider's first season as the coordinator. But then it just slid from 24 overall in 21 to number 13 overall in 22 to number 24 overall in 2023 to this 2024 special teams unit, which was an absolute abomination for the 49ers. Dead last, number 29 in field goal, number 29 in punt coverage, number 28 in kick coverage, number 31 on kick return. And the only area where they weren't bottom barrel, but they were still bad, was punt return. So when you talk about kick coverage and punt coverage, those are the two spots where Siran Neal is probably going to have the biggest potential impact for the 49ers. I don't know exactly what they're thinking regarding George Odum, but I am trying to read the writing up on the wall. And Odum, in his prime a couple years ago, was one of the best special teams players in all of football. In fact, because special teams was such a big issue after 2021, when they finished number 24, that's when the 49ers signed Oren Burks and they signed George Odum. They since extended George Odum, so he's still under contract through the 2026 season. The signing helped them really improve on special teams in 2022. But there obviously has been a regression since then. And speaking of Odum, a look at his contract here. I can give you guys the exact details of how much he's set the cost for the 49ers, so you know the decision that they have coming up on April 1st, which is a big trigger date in a lot of 49ers contracts. His base salary is $2.3 million, George Odom's this year. We don't know where Siran Neal's at yet with the base salary, but I'm sure that we'll find out soon. It's going to be a 2-year deal for the new 49ers special teamer. Odum has $340,000 in per game roster bonus money coming his way. So the 49ers will owe George Odum about $2.7 million this season, which is significantly higher than the veteran minimum, which is about $1.3 million. Siran Neal, we'll see what he had been making on his previous deals, so we can get an idea of what this might be worth for the 49ers. His cash paid in 2024 from the Dolphins was about $1.95 million, so about $2 million. In 22 and 23 for the Bills, he made more. He made $3.3 million and $2.8 million. So I would assume that Siran Neal, following the 2024 season with the Dolphins, age 29 season at about $2 million, I would assume that the 49ers will be able to lock him in at about that APY, maybe a little bit less, since this is a young man's sport and he's probably riding into the downswing of his career. So you assume $2 million for Siran Neal. George Odum will be costing the 49ers, if they keep him, about $7 million or so. And you could do the math there. If the 49ers are looking for a one-for-one replacement in the special teams ace category, then Siran Neal might be that replacement for George Odum. Or they've decided they're just going to invest a ton into special teams because they feel they can get an edge there, and they'll keep both of these guys. But I do know that April 1st is a key date to watch, because that is the date that sees $1 million of George Odom's contract guaranteed. So we will be watching with great interest to see how the 49ers try to turn this around on special teams, because as you can tell here, there is a whole heck of a lot to turn around. I mean, this is one of the most brutal columns we have ever seen on the right side. So Siran Neal, we're going to add him to the depth chart, the ceremonial adding to the depth chart for Siran Neal, because that's what we do at every single 49ers free agent signing on the channel. So let's get it open. Neal is a slot corner. So over his time in the NFL, he was a 5th-round pick out of Jacksonville State way back in, I believe, 2015. Or no, 2018, I believe. Yeah, 2017 or 2018. Ever since his entry into the NFL, Siran Neal has played at the slot corner position when he's been needed on defense. So that's where we're going to put him on this depth chart. Here it is. We can zoom in. We could see all the 49ers' new additions on the defensive side of the ball through free agency. Siran Neal is going to go right here. For now, I put Trey Brown, the former Seattle Seahawks cornerback, in at that nickelback spot, just because that means he's the 3rd cornerback for the 49ers in my projection. Remember that they like interchangeability at the cornerback position. So they like if you can play both outside and inside. I think in a pinch, Siran Neal would be able to play on the outside if they're very, very thin because of injuries. But just like George Odum, who played safety for the 49ers in a pinch when there were players hurt, I don't think that you necessarily want to turn to Siran Neal to play defense. I think that this is primarily a special teams signing for the 49ers, although because rosters aren't big, he will have to serve as depth in that position. Trey Brown was with Seattle last year, a really good press corner when he was healthy in 2023. I think that gives him the inside track to be the 49ers' 3rd cornerback, but he's going to be battling it out with Darrell Luter Jr., Trey Tomlinson, whom the 49ers claimed off of waivers from the Rams, and Siran Neal will have his name thrown into the ring. Whereas George Odum has a safety background, Siran Neal comes more from the nickelback, box cornerback background. Trey Avery also on the team. I do not project him to the 53-man roster. And at this point, we'll see who the 49ers draft, but I would think that they'll carry 5 cornerbacks, maybe 6, but they're probably going to add more to this position through one of those 11 draft picks, and then I'm going to have to start making decisions with my roster projection. Not everybody's going to be able to be on the left side of this dividing line, because the left side of this dividing line is a projection to make the team. And there still is a long off season to go, so we're going to have to wait until then. The interview that I saw Siran Neal say this in, he was talking to some of the Bills media guys, and he was talking about how he takes responsibility on special teams to make plays. A lot of times we don't notice what the guys on special teams do, but when it's a touchdown saving tackle on kick return or on punt return, all of a sudden you notice. When it's a big time fumble recovery in one of those phases of the game, all of a sudden you notice. When special teams just sucks the way that it did for the 49ers last year, you also notice. So the 49ers are trying to turn that around. It is one of the pillars of the game that was terrible for San Francisco last year. I wrote so much about it in our State of the 49ers special teams piece, and it reared its ugly head again today in my piece discussing the 49ers offensive strategy and offensive and defensive team-wide strategy to try to make this team better heading into 2025, and how they're emulating the Rams of 2 years ago throughout this offseason. Warriors losing to the Nuggets tonight. Wow, by 12 points, end of the 3rd quarter. I just got that score update. Why don't we open this up to 49ers Q&A as we talk about the state of the special teams and this new signing, Siran Neal, a week into free agency. I have done a mock draft before, and you probably won't be happy with me because it was a little too accurate. I mocked Cameron Latu to the 49ers in 2023, and it didn't work out. But I thought they were going to pick him, and they did. I've done multiple mock drafts before. I also mocked Trey Lance to the 49ers, and it didn't work out. Typically, when I'm correct on a mock draft, I mean, it might be right, but it's not necessarily good for the 49ers because the guys don't stick around for all too long. I'm sure that I'll do one at some point because people love mock drafts, but I was joking around actually with my editor today The two most unpredictable events in sports both actually happen, at least partially, in the month of April: March Madness and the NFL draft. And fans flock to try to make predictions for both of those extremely unpredictable crapshoots. And they always obsess over their predictions for both of those crapshoots. Well, guess what? It's a crapshoot. So no matter how many mock drafts somebody writes, or no matter how many brackets somebody fills out for March Madness, they're not going to be right. They might hit on a couple picks at most, but the draft is something that, I always liken it to a game, and a pick is a play call. And everybody wants to know what the 49ers are going to do at pick number 11. Well, would you be able to predict what the 49ers are going to do on play number 11 of the first game of the regular season 6 months away? Of course you wouldn't be able to do that. But people, for some reason, think that they can and they should predict it. I guess they're just trying to pass time because of boredom. But we still have several weeks until the draft, and that's why mock drafts are consumed, no matter how worthless they are. But if you want one, give me a thumbs up in the comment section, and we'll do a mock draft right here on the channel. I prefer to talk about substance instead of all this conjecture and let me guess who's going where. But there are some clues that we'll be able to gather, especially from the 30 visits, to make educated guesses about who the 49ers are particularly interested in. The thing is that once the draft happens, all that preparation could be for naught, because the guy that they may really like may not be on the pick, may not be available when they come up to pick at number 11 or whatever other pick that they have, which is why the NFL draft is best approached with the throw everything that you got up against the wall and see what sticks method. As many picks as possible maximizes your chances of success. It's worked that way for the 49ers in the past, and I think that the 49ers this year are especially excited about that rule of numbers because they have the most picks in the NFL with 11. All right, the 49ers have signed Siran Neal, special teams ace, over 300 special team snaps in each of the past 5 seasons for Siran Neal. This is his spider chart. As you can tell, he is explosive off the ground. The 93rd percentile there at the bottom is the vertical jump. He's got a 40.5-inch vertical leap, or at least he did when he came out of Jacksonville State all those years ago. But he's carved out a nice NFL career for himself. This is going to be his age 30 season, so he's a little bit younger than George Odum, and he's still managed to stick in there for those 300-plus special team snaps per season. Not particularly fast in the 40. He's measured against safeties here, and it's 49th percentile, which means he's probably running around a 4.6. He's got big hands, nice broad jump, and a decent average 3-cone drill for a safety. As you can see, the athletic profile is not crazy, but this is not an NFL starting defensive back. This is a special teamer, and with those guys, you usually like at least one really solid physical trait, and then you like to see their mentality be a little crazy to accentuate that physical trait. Take advantage of it and use it to affect on the football field. But I know the kickoff rule has changed, so it's not nearly as dangerous as it used to be. But just a couple years ago, you had to be partially insane to play kickoff in the NFL. Like, you're running at full speed, the other side's running at full speed, everybody gets a 30-plus yard head start, and then you collide. And, you can get blindsided. There's bodies flying around. You got to be a little nuts to deliver in that kind of situation, especially since everybody's running a 4.3 to a 4.5, and a lot of guys out there are 220 plus pounds. Like, it takes some courage. It takes a screw or two loose. That's where the best specialists come from. I mean, it's all upstairs. You have to be built for it. I know that the kickoff rule has changed, but I think that you have a lot of good specialists who have been grandfathered in from the old days. Somebody like Siran Neal is grandfathered in from the old days. Somebody like George Odum, really good player, grandfathered in from the old days of special teams. And you need those guys on your team, and you need a good coordinator, and then you have to have guys on the unit that don't screw it up. I think a lot of special teams issues always afflict teams who have a lot of injuries on offense and defense because the downstream effect of the roster is compromised by guys being out, and then guys are out of their gaps. I mean, you would be amazed in this sport at how meticulous the game planning is for a punt and for a punt return. Way back in the day when I was covering Stanford football, I got to know how the special teams coordinator operated, and everything was so meticulously charted. They would have a scout, and this was college back in the mid 2000s, right? So just imagine how the NFL is now with all the advanced analytics. They probably have data on every single punt from every single punter down to the square yard that punt lands in on the field. So then they have spray charts of where the punt goes, and they have situational breakdowns of where it goes, so they can shade their coverages and their return units to exactly match where they think the punt is most likely to go in any given situation. So if anybody on a punt coverage team or a punt return team is slightly off with their coverage angle or their block or their timing, that can be the difference between a win or a loss in the NFL, because it is that exact, which is why the special teams coordinator position is so important, which is why staying generally healthy as a football team is important. And it's probably part of the reason why the 49ers have struggled so much on special teams and were almost historically bad last season. They weren't on top of the details for whatever reason in the type of way that they should have been, and special teams lost them about 65 expected points on the year. Special team struggles for the 49ers were literally the difference between a positive point differential and a negative point differential in 2024. So it's something they absolutely have to fix. And Siran Neal can be one of the tools that the 49ers use to do that, right? They have so many good players have come through the 49ers through this Kyle Shanahan, John Lynch era. And they've only a couple times fielded an above average special teams unit. So then you think of the guys that are just focused on that phase of the game. Those are the types of dudes that you need in that phase of the game. And we'll know that the 49ers are taking this ultra seriously if they keep George Odum on the roster, and Siran Neal obviously makes the team. And I think they're planning on that since they just signed him to a 2-year deal. But my main domino is the George Odum decision that's coming on or before April 1st. He's due $1 million guaranteed at that point. If they're going to move on from George Odum, it's going to have to come before April 1st. And if they don't do that, well, it means that the 49ers are stocking up on special teams aces, and they do not want the same ugly result that they had last year. Alex is still in denial about how bad last year was. Anybody in denial about how bad last year was? Just behold. I mean, it's spectacularly bad. I mean, it's just shocking that this right call, this should not happen in the NFL. That was how bad the 49ers special teams was last year. What's my actual opinion on Moody? Have I not given my opinion on Jake Moody several times? Here's Jake Moody. Let's get him up on the screen. All right. Jake Moody, obviously a talented kicker. There's no question about that. He made 14 of his first 15 kicks last year. He was kicking really well, 6 of 6 in that season opener against the New York Jets. Then, because the 49ers special teams was so terrible, because the coverage on the kickoff was so bad, Jake Moody had to try to make a tackle on DJ Dallas, and he got absolutely steamrolled. It was brutal. It was ugly, and he suffered a high ankle sprain. When Jake Moody returned, he was unable to consistently make kicks. He missed those 3 against Tampa Bay. He did kick the game winner in that game. That was the Deebo Samuel, Tabor Pepper altercation, verbal altercation game on the sideline. Neither of those 2 guys is on the team anymore. But Long story short, Jake Moody only made 11 of 20. 14 of 15 before the high ankle sprain, 11 of 20 after the high ankle sprain. Anybody who talks to you about Jake Moody and his performance last year and doesn't mention the injury being the inflection point is either misinformed or they're being dishonest about this situation. The injury obviously had a very adverse impact on Jake Moody. So that's something that the 49ers must consider when they're thinking about what to do moving forward. That being said, just because you acknowledge that the injury had an adverse impact on Jake Moody doesn't mean that he's magically going to be okay after an off season. Sometimes stuff screws with kickers, right? Mentally, it messes them up. And they're never the same. Or sometimes it will mess them up for a few months until they get away in the offseason, and then they're fine the next year. I think both options are possible. I don't know what the degree of and the percentage probability of each one is, but the 49ers see no downside, and there is no downside to keeping Jake Moody on the roster at least until the start of the regular season. He's under contract for 2 more years. He was a third-round pick in 2023. And the money's not guaranteed. So you can keep him on the roster and you could bring in competition if you're the 49ers, if you believe that's something that will safeguard you moving forward. And I think that, I asked John Lynch that very question at the NFL Combine a few weeks ago. You're going to bring in competition given the frustrating nature of his struggles following the high ankle sprain, because you don't know how this is going to shake out. And John Lynch said that that's something that the 49ers are considering. And he also mentioned that he thought the 49ers might have let Moody return too quickly last year. They've been in talk with soccer teams about how the high ankle sprain affects your kicking. They firmly believe that the injury had a lot to do with the downturn, which it did. Like anybody with 2 eyes and a brain can realize that the injury had a lot to do with the downturn. Now the question is, how can Moody bounce back from that injury? Will he bounce back from that injury, and how the 49ers going to ensure themselves moving forward? But he is talented. That is absolutely undeniable. He's done some really good stuff for the 49ers. And I think that any objective view of the situation realizes how nuanced it is. Stanley's an awesome guy from Hawaii. Stanley's been a long-time viewer of the show. He says, aloha. He thinks Siran Neal on special teams plays nickel. Yes, he plays slot cornerback, but he's just a backup slot cornerback. You think he's going to be a good addition? Keep up the good news. Stay safe. God bless. Talk to you soon. Aloha. Mahalo. Thanks, Stanley. Appreciate you. King Wolfie hopes that Brant Boyer gives the 49ers good insight. Brant Boyer's coordinated some good units. Ironically, his units when they've been bad, have been really hampered by the kicking position. We see Brant Boyer there in the illustration next to Jake Moody. Bring in competition. I think that's the way to do it. That's my recommendation to the 49ers. Bring in competition for Jake Moody. And that's what I told John Lynch. And then John Lynch said, yeah, I think that, it seemed that the 49ers were leaning that way, but we'll still see what they actually do. They don't have to bring in competition right now because they're not even practicing right now. But by OTAs, I would expect there to be some competition, or at least by training camp, if that's the way that they do go. And Lynch said that if there is competition, the 49ers are confident that Jake Moody would actually rise to the top. And if he answers the bell, that's great. You've got a talented kicker under contract for 2 more years. One of the risks is that you cut Jake Moody and he goes on to be a really good kicker for another team. There's a story of that in 49ers history. Let me tell you about the 1994 49ers NFL draft. The 1994 49ers NFL draft is actually a famous one because Bryant Young, who went in the first round, the pick that the 49ers, Dana Stubblefield was the pick that the 49ers got from Kansas City for Joe Montana. But Bryant Young was a first-round pick that the 49ers had, number 7 overall. He went to the Hall of Fame. He was a huge part of the 49ers defensive line in their most recent Super Bowl winning season. In fact, I was talking so much this morning and throughout my article up on the San Francisco Standard about rookie defensive linemen and how the 49ers are emulating the Rams and how they're focused on the draft for the NFL, for the defensive line. And the Rams have obviously been successful with the young D linemen. The last time the 49ers won a Super Bowl, it was Bryant Young, a rookie who was one of the anchors for the 49ers in the middle of the line. And Dana Stubblefield was also in there. He had been drafted with that first-round pick that came from Kansas City for Joe Montana the year prior. But the 49ers had 2 first-round picks in 1994. Bryant Young and William Floyd, bar none, the fullback. Both of those guys, big-time contributors. People forget that the 1994 49ers also drafted a kicker, and they drafted that kicker in the 3rd round. His name was Doug Bryan. Now, that kicker didn't last with the 49ers all too long. Doug Bryan was cut the very next season because he really struggled. He struggled as a rookie during the 49ers Super Bowl winning season. And then the struggles continued into the 1995 season, so the 49ers cut him. But Doug Bryan ended up staying in the league for over a decade, made a whole heck of a lot of field goals, played all the way through the 2005 season with the Chicago Bears. Probably remember the name, Doug Bryan. Well, a lot of people don't realize that the 49ers actually drafted him in the 3rd round of the 1994 draft. Just like Jake Moody was drafted in the 3rd round of the 2023 draft. So he went on to be a good kicker after the 49ers cut him. Maybe that's what he needed to get it into shape. I can't get into the minds of kickers, but there's always the risk that if you do cut a guy that is talented, he will figure it out moving forward. And if there's really no upside to cutting him right now, and there's no great upside to cutting Jake Moody right now, why do it? I think bringing in competition sounds like a better idea. Here's a question. 49ers finally got ahead of the contract pack with Deommodore Lenoir's deal. How much influence do you expect the recent contracts to have on Purdy, the recent skill players contracts to have on Purdy's? Well, I don't know if those contracts that are not in the quarterback market will directly impact Purdy's, but those are all being impacted by the salary cap, which has risen about 24% over the course of the past 2 years. That obviously gives Brock Purdy much more room to negotiate from. Any standard NFL negotiation, especially if the salary cap is rising, will invoke that. Like the agents will say, hey, the cap is much higher than when comparable quarterbacks signed their contracts a couple of years ago. So my client deserves a piece of that inflation pie, right? So I think that the inflation that we're seeing, the cap inflation that we're seeing impact a lot of these deals, such as the one that we saw today, signed by Derek Stingley Jr., $30 million per year for the Houston Texans. That's been a big jump in the cornerback market. We've obviously seen the massive ones at wide receiver with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. We've seen the edge rusher contracts. Myles Garrett just topped it out at $40 million. Trey Hendrickson is going to get a lot of money too. That all reflects a booming market, and that booming market's going to carry over to the quarterback position as well. So the one caveat is that Josh Allen just signed a deal where he didn't care about being number 1 in APY. And you guys know me, I talk a lot about APY and I say it doesn't really matter as far as the substance of the deal goes. And I mean that. It's more about the guarantees. And Josh Allen signed a deal with the most total guaranteed money ever. I think that shifts the focus back onto what actually is important, nuts and bolts wise, because Allen was the MVP and he should have some sway. So I think that the 49ers are going to have to pay up when it comes to guarantees for Brock Purdy. The good news is that he's a dependable QB. 49ers love him, and you invest guaranteed money in players who are reliable, who fit that mold. They just invested $7 million fully guaranteed in Kyle Juszczyk, who is the definition of reliability. So I think that contracts are growing just as the market grows, just as the salary cap grows. And I think that the Josh Allen deal brings some sanity to the QB discourse. And I think the 49ers and Brock Purdy will find a happy medium when it comes to APY and the total and fully guaranteed money. And everything will move forward from there. All right, I'm going to go watch the end of the Warriors game. 49ers sign a special teams ace. Siran Neal's been around the league for a while, 30 years old, plays some slot cornerback, but the 49ers trying to make an atrocious special teams unit better. Right now, before you leave, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. I am off And happy St. Patrick's Day. We'll see you soon.